Hello everyone, welcome back to the Zach F1 channel, and in today's episode we are going to be talking about everything you are going to need to know for F1 Fantasy going into the Qatar Grand Prix. Now quickly, before we get into that, let's look at some of the things we learned from the Vegas Grand Prix that could potentially help us out going further ahead into the last part of the season. So the first thing is, that is the last time I am trusting the practice debrief race pace simulations. It happened in Canada, it's happened again. If Mercedes look fast, you just bring them in. That's the lesson we learned this weekend. And if I do it once, my bad. If I do it twice, you know, not learning, my bad. If I do it 3 times, I've gone psychotic. So if Mercedes look fast in the Qatar, you know where I'll be heading. But then some vital information as well is we've had a lot of talks from Ferrari saying that this is going to be their strongest track going into this weekend. McLaren haven't really looked anywhere that good now that they don't have that rear wing that they've been infamously using in Baku that made them very strong. Then you also have Mercedes, who at a cold track look good, but coming into a hot track they don't look too hot. Who are we going to get on the pole position? Gasly? Obviously not, but the main point of saying all of that is it's a very open race, and that's why, luckily, it's a sprint race weekend, and we're going to be using a lot of help from the sprint quali results. Right, so before we get into the chips, which will be the next section of the video, please remember we have the F1 Fantasy survey. I'll put it in the link in the description and in the comments for any of you who want to make change to F1 Fantasy. Put down what you don't like about the game, put down what you do like about the game, because we're trying to make some change with F1 Fantasy, and we want the whole F1 Fantasy community to come together and really show F1 what needs to be changed about this game. And of course, like and subscribe and follow my Twitter and join my Discord. Right, chips wise, this is a very important part of the video, and that's why I put it right at the start. And that's because, ladies and gentlemen, it's the final sprint race weekend, which means you have to use up the remaining chips that you have left. Now, we're going to be calling this part Zach's do's and don'ts for the chips. So, let's say you only have 1 chip left, bar final fix, and you have no other chips left. Automatically, you use it this weekend. All of these chips are going to be strong at sprint race. A sprint race weekend, more points up for grabs, more potential in these chips. Plain and simple like that. Now, if you have 2 chips left and it's both Limitless and extra DRS, it wouldn't be very good still having them by now, but what you would have to do is see, is anyone being absolutely dominant this weekend? And if so, you'd choose extra DRS over Limitless. Or is it more of a bundle at the top and you really don't know? Then it'd probably be more like a Limitless option. Now, if you have either of Limitless and extra DRS plus one of the other chips, let's say Autopilot, Final Fix, Wildcard, you use those chips because Limitless and extra DRS are the most powerful chip. So let's say you've got extra DRS and you also have Autopilot, use extra DRS. Now, let's say you only have the smaller chips left like Wildcard and Final Fix. Realistically, you just want to be getting through them now because there's only 2 more races in the season, so you've just got to go boom, boom. I would recommend if there's a driver out of position, you go for Final Fix, or if your team really needs fixing, you go Wildcard. Realistically, it's better to Wildcard now so you get 1 more race out of it, and then Final Fix in Abu Dhabi. It's not ideal having both of them left now, and then you sort of have the middle ground. Let's say you have Autopilot and Wildcard left this weekend. Then use Autopilot. So you've sort of got the big 2 chips, extra DRS and Limitless. If you have one of those, use them this weekend. If you have the middle ground chip, like a No Negative or an Autopilot, which are both very good, not as powerful as the other 2, but still stronger than Final Fix and Wildcard, use them this weekend. If you only have one of Final Fix or Wildcard, just use it this weekend, get it done. Realistically, if you have more than 2 chips left, you just use your more powerful ones and you forget about Final Fix or you forget about Wildcard. But that is as easy as it gets. So now you know what to do with every chip in your team. Let's say that you use Limitless this weekend. Well, for me, you just pick the top 5 in sprint quali. Now, of course, again, I'm going to use Gasly again just because of his amazing qualifying in Vegas. Let's say Gasly gets another P3. Don't put him in your team. Now, if the top 5 looks like Norris, Leclerc, Verstappen, Sainz, and Piastri, easy peasy, you know who to put in. Now, let's say Leclerc's P15, he's had a terrible qualifying. You know he's going to come back from that. He's going to score more points. You put him in your team. Russell qualifies P16, P17. You know he's going to do better than that. Put him in your team. So it very much depends on what happens in sprint quali. And you're going to see that's a very big part of this video because sprint quality is such an OP thing to know, because it's all of the cars going full speed. So we basically know who's not on race pace, but on qualifying pace at least, who's going to be fastest and who's going to be slowest. And then if you do use extra DRS this weekend, you need to have 2 premium drivers in your team. Now, don't make the mistake of getting in the best premium drivers if it hurts your constructors. You still need to have the top 2 constructors, whether it be McLaren, Ferrari, Mercedes, whoever it is in Qatar. You couldn't afford the top 2 constructors and you could only afford Norris and Russell with them, you go for Norris and Russell. But it really depends from team to team where you go from this. Now, what are the most likely duos that are going to be? It's going to either be Norris, Leclerc, Norris, Russell, Leclerc, Russell, Leclerc, Sainz, and then potentially, if you've got even more money than that, Verstappen, Norris, Verstappen, Leclerc, Verstappen, Russell. Those are the sorts of extra DRS we're going to be seeing. But again, it's pretty much plain and simple. You pick the top 2 in qualifying. If you know that they look like they're going to be dominant this weekend, it's very easy if it's one team that just looks good, one of the McLarens or the Ferraris or the Mercedes, or, well, Verstappen. Not really a team, but you know what I mean. It's easier if one of them just looks really good. But from what we've seen in the last few races, it's hard to tell. Just look out for the top 2 in qualifying. Or let's say one of the big drivers like Leclerc does qualify bad again. You'd probably want him as your 2 times driver. And then the guy who qualifies pole on your 3 times. Right, so with that out of the way, the constructors are pretty easy as well. For now, playing it safe, it's McLaren and Ferrari. Those 2 look like the base constructors for every weekend that we have. Now, will we see a surprise from Mercedes? Keep an eye out for that, because if we do see pace from them, you could change it up. But with Red Bull, like we've seen all of these other weekends, Red Bull are done now. Mercedes is starting to creep up a bit, but it is literally none of the cheaper teams as well. You will see the constructors, they score so many points, and the cheap ones don't. So you're losing a lot of points if you go for, let's say, a V-Carb, a Williams or a Haas compared to a McLaren, Ferrari or Mercedes. Now with premium drivers, it's a little bit weird because normally I have a top 3. But again, this weekend, I can't stress enough how important it is knowing that we can see sprint qualifying. So we're going to know who we really want in our team from the premium drivers, whoever does well from that. Now, again, I'll reiterate, Norris Leclerc, Leclerc Sainz, Norris Russell will be the most common duos picked. Now, what I can help you out with, because we know for a fact, is the premium drivers not to go anywhere near. Now, Sergio Perez, he's struggling to get out of Q1. He can barely score points. Do not go anywhere near him. Fernando Alonso, technically he's a premium driver. He's right at the bottom of the list. Aston Martin are rubbish. You don't want to go anywhere near them. And then you also have Lewis Hamilton. This one's a bit iffy just because he's very expensive now. He's more expensive than Oscar Piastri. So Mercedes really have to be on top of their form for me to even consider Lewis Hamilton. And then also Max Verstappen, again, he has to be qualifying pole if anyone brings him in his team, because again, he's over 30 million. There's so much more value elsewhere that can get you more points. Now, cheap driver wise, who do you not want to bring in? Now, the top name that comes to mind is Pierre Gasly. Now, I said this in Vegas as well. I thought, and what did happen, obviously qualified top 3 in Vegas, and then he had the DNF. But before the DNF, we saw just how far he dropped back. The Alpine can't do better than where Gasly qualifies it, which is very bad in F1 Fantasy, because then you get a lot of positions lost points, you don't get overtake points, it becomes very iffy. And then you have his teammate. Now, it's actually for quite a different reason, but it's just because he's too expensive. His teammate is 14.6 million in F1 Fantasy, and that is just ridiculous. That is almost premium driver prices. Now, there's so many better cheap drivers at a lot less. So steer clear of both Alpine drivers. They are not the way to go. Then you also have Kevin Magnussen. Again, too expensive. He's in the 13 millions now, and there's better assets below that will cost less, and you can get better premium drivers in. And then you have Lance Stroll. Again, too expensive for what he gives you. Aston Martin look terrible at the minute. They're really struggling to get even into the top 16. Stay clear of them. And then the final one is Alex Albon. Williams are really struggling to finish out the end of this season. They keep on having issues. Albon keeps on crashing. It's just 2-2. I can't remember the last time Albon didn't have a DNF. It's really bad. He's on negative points now. Steer clear. In the situation of Zhou versus Albon, Zhou wins every day now for F1 Fantasy. Now, for drivers you do want to bring into your team, the top dog, and I said this in Vegas, and he amazed. How many points did he get? A lot. So much more than I actually thought he'd get, was Nico Hülkenberg. He's a no-brainer for me. If you have the money to jump from a Zhou or a Tsunoda up to a Hülkenberg, go for it. Now, I bet you couldn't guess who I was also going to say as well. You have the ladder from Zhou to Hulkenberg that are the best cheap drivers that you want to use. So, you have Zhou. He's a very good option, but if you don't have the team value, he's probably someone you're just going to have to stick with because you want to focus on your premium drivers and your constructors. Now, let's say you have McLaren and Ferrari, Leclerc and Sainz, and you're happy with your team, and you now have enough money to increase Zhou to a Lawson. You do that. Then if you have money from Lawson to Tsunoda, you go to that. And then Tsunoda up to Hulkenberg. Those are the ladders that you want to take. And you can do the exact same thing for Bottas and Colapinto, who are the other two musts in your team. Bottas because he's so cheap, and Colapinto as well. If you have enough money, you do the same ladder and go from Bottas to Zhou and so on. Colapinto to Zhou and so on. And honestly, that's all the advice I can give you for this race weekend before sprint qualifying. Now, I'm going to go over some generic teams that you can bring in or just think about before the sprint quali. But again, I'm going to stress it for the third or fourth time in this video, how important just watching sprint qualifying is, because looking at the results, you know, it could be swayed. Has Leclerc just put a stonking lap in? We don't know. You need to see, okay, who's got the best pace throughout the whole session. Make sure you've seen that because it's going to be very important. But let's say if Mercedes look the fastest, here is a team that you can go for. You would have a team just like this with Russell, Hamilton, Hulkenberg, Bottas, Colapinto, McLaren and Mercedes. Now, if you can't afford this team, the initial thing you do, and I'm only going to show it for this team, as all of the rest of the teams can do the exact same thing, but it's the Hulkenberg down to Tsunoda, then to Lawson, then to Zhou. Then, if you have enough money to change your premium driver, then if you still need more money to bring in the Mercedes assets, then you drop Hamilton down to Piastri and then to Sainz. And then you get a team like this. Now, also with a team like this, if McLaren looks faster, bring in McLaren. If Ferrari looks faster, then you bring in Ferrari. However, my bet is McLaren for this weekend as an overall better constructor. Always bringing them in as a constructor seems like the base for a good team. Now, let's say Ferrari look good. Let's look at the team you could bring in there. And yes, all you'd have to do is swap over Russell to Leclerc and change Mercedes from a constructor to Ferrari. And it's just as simple as that. Now, if McLaren look good, you just bring in the triple asset situation. So you'd bring in Norris, Piastri, and you'd keep the Ferrari and McLaren as constructors. Again, with this team, let's say Mercedes look better, you can easily change Ferrari to Mercedes. There's quite a lot of variations that could be happening this weekend. That's why sprint qualifying is so important. Now, let's say Ferrari and McLaren look like they're tussling it up at the front. Normally, Ferrari have better race pace, so realistically, I would still go for Leclerc and Sainz. Like that would actually be still pretty decent to use. But if you wanted a bit of both teams, then you go for the Norris and Leclerc builds, which is sort of my favourite team at the minute because you get a bit of the McLaren build and you get a bit of the Ferrari build. You get the best of both worlds and you're happy with that. Again, with the cheap drivers, the Zhou to Hulkenberg ladder. Remember that. And then finally, if Verstappen looks good, you do not change the constructors. Remember, Mercedes look good. You can change one of them there. Realistically, it'd probably be Ferrari. But if you have enough money, it'd be Verstappen and Russell. Then if you could afford to increase it, Verstappen to Sainz. Then Sainz to Piastri. And then Piastri to Leclerc. And Leclerc to Norris. But that is it, everyone. I know it's actually been quite a long video for my F1 Fantasy videos because there was a lot to get through. And there is a lot still up in the air. But that is why I'm going to be making a post-sprint quali video, put it out to everyone watching so that I can basically lay down exactly which teams you want to bring out, exactly which chips look the best, everything again once we've got a bit more clearer view. Again, I do think it's still looking like a McLaren Ferrari build because of the hot weather. It's not going to be as cold, it's going to be more grippy. And also last year we saw Qatar, McLaren did pretty well. So we'll see what happens. And I'll also be live streaming an hour and 15 minutes before sprint race to go over all of the final thoughts and do the final changes to the teams, as that will be the team deadline. But anyway, thank you all so much for watching. I hope you all enjoyed and could get something out of this video. Remember the F1 Fantasy survey in the description down below and in the comments. Please help us come together as a community and let's get stuff changed. But anyway, as always, it was a pleasure. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you all later for some more F1 content. Bye-bye.